My name is Marwa Elkashif. I'm assistant professor at Wartburg College, and this pedagogical approach I am presenting today is deeply connected to my background. I earned both my bachelor's and master's degree in interior architecture, where I became interested in spatial experiences, exhibitions, visual communication, and how people interact with space and information. My interest in these areas led me to study and earning an MFA in graphic design and a master's degree in human computer interaction. Throughout my studies, I noticed that much of graphic design education focused mainly on two-dimensional outcomes, which led me to question where the three-dimensional aspect of graphic design. This question became even more important as I attended professional conferences and events hosted by SEGD. I noticed increasing discussions around experiential design, immersive environments, and phygital experiences that blend physical and digital interaction. The examples you see on the screen featured on the SCGD website, along with a growing number of job postings seeking designers with 3D, environmental, and experiential design skills, highlight a shift in the graphic design profession. Graphic design is no longer limited to screens and printed materials. It is increasingly integrated into physical space and user experience. As I observed these challenges, I began questioning whether graphic design education is preparing students for this evolving landscape. This led me to conduct research with educators and industry professionals to better understand the challenges and opportunities of integrating the 3D and the spatial design into graphic design education. Through surveys, I found that graphic design education still needs to better align with industry demands. Students struggle with the spatial concepts, and evolving 3D skills requires significant time, practice, and repeated exposure. In my earlier work, I developed an initial VR platform to support 3D learning. While it demonstrates the potential of immersive technologies, I recognize that such tools are not always accessible, particularly in smaller institutions like the one where I'm currently teaching. This led me to start looking for more accessible ways to bring 3D thinking into graphic design education, approaches that could fit within existing design courses and everyday classroom practice. I find typography to be a natural starting point as a core element of graphic design. Typography can bridge 2D design and 3D spatial experiences while also serving as a powerful tool for communication through themes such as empathy, resilience, hope, and belonging. It helps connect design to real human experiences. This project is organized into three phases. The first phase focuses on two typographic composition. The second phase transforming two typography into 3D physical form. And the third phase emphasized placemaking and environmental integration placing, which I will explain all of these phases in more details later, but I want to first introduce the overall goal of this project. I was hoping to allow the student to explore typography beyond flat surface by expanding it into spatial and dimensional context, rather than treating it only as a 2D graphic element. Hoping to learn the students the actual process of converting a 2D design into a 3D form and applying design skills in a new medium. Developing the student's ability to think about space, scale, movement, and user experience and human interaction with the typography in space. Understanding how typography changes in real space, including how size, placement, structure, and materials affect readability and perception, and how it is perceived differently when experienced in spatial environment instead of a flat surface. I want to encourage the students' creativity and real-world design thinking by helping students consider multiple perspectives rather than approaching problems from a single viewpoint. Foster meaningful engagement and emotional connection through typographic experience in 2D and 3D. In order to measure these goals or outcomes that I was hoping to, a student survey was designed. Unlike using a Likert scale and open-ended question, the survey included a total of 9 questions and was divided into 3 sections. The first section assessed students' understanding of typography as a form of visual communication before and after the project, It examined how their understanding evolved, particularly in relation to design principles and visual communication skills. The second section explores student experiences of translating 2D design into 3D form, including the challenges they encountered. It measures their understanding of the spatial relationships and objects' interaction in space. The final section investigates how typography and design foster community engagement, inclusion, and interaction on campus. It also examined the emotional and social impact of visual communication in 2D and 3D design, and the extent to which students believe their work can create positive change and meaningful community connection. Getting back to the projects and phase one, which is a 2D composition, typography was used in that phase as both a learning tool and a way to foster connection and belonging within the college community. This phase was meant to address student experiences of stress, isolation, emotional disconnection, while helping students feel seen, valued, and supported. Through this approach, the project emphasized that students matter by placing posters in a high traffic hallway in a campus where they become part of everyday campus movement and visibility. By making these messages highly visible, the project reinforced a sense of belonging, community, connection, and recognition of the student lived experiences. Students developed two typographic posters using short phrases rooted in hope, empathy, resilience, and social justice. Um, like the one you see on the screen now, which is injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The other phrase was stand up, speak out, make a change. Um, these messages are intended to encourage awareness, care, inclusion, and peer to peer connection across the campus community. Another set of the students' posters include messages such as growing through what you're going through and trust your journey. Across of all these works, students focus on building visual hierarchy through different types of contrast, including size, weight, color, texture, and direction, and sometimes even shapes. Through this process, students learn how typographic decisions affect communication and emotional impact. The project brings together technical skills building and social engaged design, aiming to create a more visible, supportive, and inclusive campus environment where students feel seen, heard, and connected. After completing the first phase, students move into phase two, where they select one phrase from their poster designs and begin shifting their thinking from flat composition to spatial construction. At this point, they take the typography design they developed in phase one and start refining and manipulating it into three-dimensional sculpture or a form. What was once a flat composition now have to work as an object that can be viewed from the front, side, and back. This is often when students realize that typography is no longer supported by a sheet of paper. It now requires structural thinking. At this stage, students begin considering how their typographic forms might be physically constructed and supported in three-dimensional space. They are encouraged to keep material possibilities in mind as they develop their concepts. This process prompts students to think critically about issues such as depth, scale, balance, stability, structure, and fabrication. As they work through this consideration, they began to understand typography not merely as a 2D arrangement on a surface, but as a physical form that occupies and interacts with the space. This shift in perspective encourages students to consider both the visual and the structural dimension of design. Students began by creating their 3D typography design in Adobe Illustrator, then using Adobe Dimension to visualize how their design will look in 3D before bringing them to life through 3D printing. Once the prototypes are printed, students can hold and examine their design in physical form. They test factors such as structure, spacing, visibility, while deciding whether different elements should remain connected or be separated. They also explore how spacing affects readability, balance, and the relationship between positive and negative space. Based on that, students refine their design to improve clarity, readability, and structural stability before moving on to the next phase. On the screen, other students' sketches explore different ideas. And as you can see, both the students maintain the visual identity of their original posters, and is it kind of like it was clear from their designs that they approached the transition of the 3D differently. The first students relied primarily on typography as a form, while the second student incorporate additional design elements, including shapes, from the original poster. As you can see here, these elements were transformed into a garden-like an archway that functions as a symbolic gateway, reinforcing the message of growth, resilience, and moving forward through challenges. After phase two, students began thinking beyond the object itself and considering how their design would function within a large physical environment. They explored how their installation would fit within the surrounding environment, including trees, buildings, and other features of the space. They also consider how people would experience and move around the installation. In addition, thought, students thought about how color, light, and the environment could affect the overall appearance of the work and influence their design decision. We also discussed material selection and how materials can add meaning to a design. Students were encouraged to think about which materials would be most appropriate for their concepts and how factors such as weather, location, and durability might affect both the lifespan of the installation and the messages it communicates. To conduct, the first phase allows kind of like it follows a traditional typography poster assignment. The second introduced 3D modeling and printing, which many programs already have access to in their studio and labs. The third phase builds on ideas from my experience as a TA in a placemaking focused course. The strength of this structure is how it connects these stages by using the same phrase or content across all phases. This continuity encourages the student to understand how both meaning and the structure of any element can shift as it moves from two composition to a 3D form and finally into a spatial and environmental context. Across these phases, students were able to understand design as something that extends beyond the screen or page, where typography as an element is no longer confined to paper, but becomes part of physical space and live experience. Overall, the survey results showed clear growth in students' confidence, skills, and understanding of design beyond traditional two-dimensional formats. Before the project, 20% of the students felt they had a limited understanding, 30% reported moderate understanding, and 50% felt that they had a good understanding. Considering that this was their first course focused primarily on typography, these results were encouraging. They have taken previous courses that integrate typography, but this was the first one they were really focused on type. After completing the project, students reported much higher levels of understanding. About 80% of the students indicate a significant understanding of typography as a design principle. A part of the growth came from applying the same concepts across both 2D and 3D format, which helps students see and experience design principles in a new ways. Through this process, students gained a better understanding of how elements and principles of design, such as scale, proportion, and color, can function differently in 2D and 3D design. Students were also asked about their confidence in working with 3D before beginning the project. Before the project, 80% reported that they were not confident working in 3D, while only 20% felt slightly confident. Notably, those students had previous experience with sculptures and had taken courses with the art department. After completing the project, the results showed a significant increase in confidence. 90% of the students reported feeling confident working in 3D, while the remaining 10 reported a moderate level of confidence. This represents a significant shift and suggests that the project helps students become more comfortable engaging with the three-dimensional design. These responses indicate that working across both mediums helps the student develop a deeper understanding of elements and principles of design by allowing them to experience and apply them in physical spaces rather than only in a flat surface. Students were also asked about the challenges they faced during the transition from 2D to 3D. The first thing that most of the student has been saying, or I can say all of them, was the scale and proportion. The second thing is developing skills in Adobe Dimension, since this is the first time they have using Adobe Dimension. Thinking more critically about durability, lifespan, um, and how the choices of materials and can influence the meaning and longevity of the work. How people interact with the 3D design in the human dimension. This was another challenge the student has been facing. Students face the challenge of designing 3D installation within fixed real-world environment that they could not control or modify. Unlike 2D work, where they were able to control the background of their posters, the colors, um, on the spatial or environment, they had to respond directly to existing spatial conditions such as architecture, landscape, and surrounding elements. This required them to adapt their ideas to context rather than adjusting the environment to fit their design. Students were also asked about the emotional and social impact of typography. All of the students agreed that typography can have a strong impact on people's experiences and interactions, particularly in fostering inclusion, community engagement, and a sense of belonging on campus. And here are a few quotes from the students. Um, the students kind of like emphasize that typography can inspire, motivate, and create meaningful change. Moving from 2D to 3D increase the emotional impact through depth and physical presence. Engaging with the work in a physical space made the message more memorable, interactive, and impactful. I believe this project represents an important first step toward helping students develop the skills needed to work in the three-dimensional spaces and designing cohesive brand environment later. Thank you.